Good morning. Good morning. Welcome into the Out of Bounds show, ESPN 1059 The Zone. And the show is brought to you by Total Transportation of Mississippi. They offer nationwide and regional routes for solo and team drivers. All right. Competitive pay, paid vacation, full benefits, all powered by Total Transportation of Mississippi, offering nationwide and regional routes, frequent home time, weekly pay, and monthly bonuses. You can apply today. TotalMS.com. It's right there on the front page, TotalMS.com. We're 1059 The Zone ESPN. Our guests join us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. We welcome in Cowboys NFL insider Ed Werder to the show. Before I get in to the Cowboys currently, I follow Ed on Twitter. He's a good follow, and at some point in the last week, he mentioned he was with a group. I don't know if they were in a bar or restaurant or after practice or something, and that the legendary Jimmie Johnston, former Dallas Cowboys coach, Hurricanes and Dolphins and so on, walked Ed and some others, maybe his colleagues, through the Herschel Walker trade and kind of how it was layered, and it is known as possibly the best trade in the history of the NFL. Ed, I think I'm right. You tweeted about that within the last week. When Jimmie walked you through that night, can you give us kind of what he was thinking and how it all played out and so on?
Yeah, the reason, Bo, that I mentioned that Herschel Walker trade was it was on the anniversary of that deal, which the Cowboys refer to as the Great Train Robbery. And you know, if you watch the America's Team, A Gambler and His Cowboys documentary on Netflix, it's still a big point of contention between Jerry and Jimmie as to who exactly made this trade. And Jimmie has insisted that it was he did it, he initiated it. He's the one who called Michael in after they had an offer from the Browns that they thought they could improve upon. They reached out to the Vikings, and they made this very complicated deal. And my argument has always been in trying to reconcile who did what in this deal was we were at an NFL owners meeting at the time in Dallas at the DFW Hyatt, and Jimmie late that night explained to a handful of beat writers all of the complexities of the trade. In other words, what motivated them was not what it seemed. It wasn't acquiring the 5 veteran players from Minnesota who were going to immediately become Cowboys starters because this was such a depleted roster in terms of talent, that the real goal was to get the draft picks and that Jimmie was going to get the draft picks. And now that he had the players already and the potential to choose the draft picks and cut the players, he actually had all the leverage he needed to get both if that's what he wanted. Because Minnesota wasn't going to take back players that they traded to Dallas 6 months before, right? That would be an awkward situation to introduce into your locker room. And so he knew they were, and he understood that the Vikings thought the Cowboys wanted the players when really it was the picks that they prized, and that's what Jimmie was going to manipulate the draft ultimately to get was all of the picks. And they obviously did that, and it was a central piece in building a team that won 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. They got Emmitt Smith, they got Darren Woodson, they got Kevin Smith, the starting corner, they got Russell Maryland. Wow. So it was an enormous deal, and that it was on the recent anniversary. And keeping in mind all of the obvious conflict that still exists between Jimmie and Jerry about, who was responsible for making this brilliant trade, one-of-a-kind trade.
And it was Jimmie Johnston, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, Jimmie made all the phone calls, and contractually, I've seen the contract, and Jimmie provided the contract to the producers of the documentary. They chose not to use it, but it's very clear in there that Jimmie had control over personnel.
Even before we connected with you, we've talked about Jimmie Johnston for years because I'm pretty fascinated with him and how talented he was, both college level and pro level. It was such a short burst, as you know, Ed, even Cowboys and Dolphins, because there's so many of these guys, Chuck Noll, Landry, Belichick, and all these guys that coach forever and ever, the Harbaughs, whatever. But I've always thought Jimmie was also one of the best general managers in the history of the league, and talent evaluators. Just understood, even at Miami, he was moving safeties to linebackers and making linebackers edge rushers and all that kind of stuff, Ed, as you know. Do you consider him one of the better evaluators in the history of the NFL?
I think he's one of the great, motivators of players, one of the great evaluators of prospects, and a great roster builder, a great builder of teams. And, he knew how to create the right mentality for the biggest games the Cowboys would play. And to me, that was the biggest takeaway watching those 9 episodes, was just how great those teams were, how they were always up for the moment. Like, they played their absolute best in the biggest games against the best opponents. And that's something we haven't seen from the Cowboys in 30 years. But yeah, he was, when he came in, I think people forget, when he came to the Cowboys in 1989, off a national championship at Miami, and drafted Troy Aikman first overall, he had a vision that was different than what the kind of football that was being played in the NFC East at the time. I mean, at the time he joins a division, with Joe Gibbs in Washington and Bill Parcells with the Giants, and it was all about being big and physical. And Jimmie took the opposite approach. He wanted to emphasize speed and quickness, and so he really exploited the philosophies that other teams in his division had, which was contrary to his, because he felt like quick and fast beats big and slow, and he proved to be right about it. He flipped the division upside down in a short space of time. But I don't know that people recognize how Jimmie saw football and how he saw the evolution of it to more of a speed and quickness, open field type of game. And that's what the Cowboys played. They were brutally, efficient up front on both lines of scrimmage. They would win the line of scrimmage. But Jimmie also wanted speed to be a key element, especially on the defensive side of the ball.
Ed Werder, Cowboys NFL insider on the Out of Bounds show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. All right, so after watching America's Team, The Gambler and His Cowboys on Netflix, and you were all in that, and again, I was a kid, so I could only get so much information while they were rolling, right? But we were paying attention. You were there in the trenches.
Yeah.
But we didn't have Twitter and .com and all that, as you well know. So my tell me if I'm wrong here, Ed. My takeaway on that was Emmett was great. Jimmie's amazing. You mentioned the 2 line of scrimmages. I didn't realize that maybe Michael Irvin was the key to the whole thing. As much as he would get in trouble off the field and had a bad boy image, but his competitive temperament and his drive and willing to win, I just didn't know he ran that hot. It was almost like he was the guy who drove this whole thing, and you don't usually say that about a wide receiver, Ed Werder.
Yeah, I was asked to do a sit-down for a piece that NFL Films did on Michael Irvin's career, and you're right about, he was a great competitor, and he brought that to practice every day. He brought it in training camp, and then in the games, he was otherworldly in that regard. But he also did hurt the team a couple times because he got suspended for, and he embarrassed the franchise for some off-the-field issues. And the way I kind of summarized Michael Irvin was, I said he gave football everything he had, every game, every practice, every off-season workout. But he also took everything it offered. Yeah. And that led to some of the problems that he had. But even to this day, like just last week, Jerry was talking about the leadership that Dak Prescott provides, and he's trying to put that into perspective in terms of, all the time he's owned the team for 36 years. And he wants to say that Dak Prescott is the greatest leader he's ever been around from a football point of view. And the only thing that prevents him from saying that unequivocally is the regard he had for Michael Irvin and all he meant to those teams. Ultimately, Jerry puts Dak Prescott on that level. He is the current Michael Irvin in terms of what he means in that locker room, on that field, getting guys to play their best, getting guys prepared to perform at the highest level, holding teammates accountable. I mean, he says that, he puts Dak Prescott right there with Michael Irvin, but that speaks to where after 35 years in the NFL, he still all this time later regards Michael Irvin as that fierce a competitor and that great of a player.
What's it like when that trio? Aikman has been very critical of the Cowboys. So is Emmett and Irvin. Yet I have to believe they have, or maybe one or two have an even closer relationship. But they're in the club with Jerry, as you know, from the success that we all know about. But what is it like when they're around each other, knowing how critical they've been about Jerry as a GM, Ed?
I think Michael and Emmett have been more careful about the way they describe Jerry's performance as a general manager and builder of a team publicly. Troy has not been that. Troy has been unfiltered. You heard him say in the documentary that Jerry's trying to learn how to be a general manager on my time as a quarterback. My assumption is that he was even more critical than that, and some of that was not used because Jerry had some level of editorial control over the project. And I think Troy was somewhat surprised that even that criticism was allowed to remain in the piece. But yeah, Troy does radio locally. Troy does, he's very prominent on ESPN Monday Night Football, and he always did the big game for Fox on Sundays, for decades. And he was always honest about how he felt about Jerry. I think that in some ways, Troy feels like because of Jerry's poor performance as a general manager that he had half a career. He had the great half when he had Jimmy building the team and preparing everybody to play and all those great games. But the back half of his career was an unmitigated disaster between the injuries and the deteriorating roster that he was forced to play with. So I think Troy's been like, hey, there's nothing Jerry can do to me. Like, I'm already in the Hall of Fame on my own merits. I'm already in the Ring of Honor. He couldn't deny me that. I'm not beholden to Jerry. I'm going to tell it like it is, because that's the personality that Troy's always had. And that's what I respect so much about him, is he doesn't care, at what cost it is to him personally to be truthful publicly about his experience with the Cowboys and with Jerry as a general manager.
Ed Werder on the Out of Bounds show, driven by your next GMC Sierra truck at Fowler GMC, Pearl Brandon. This is ESPN 105.9 The Zone. So how would you describe their Aikman and Jerry Jones? Is it just they're connected because of the 3 Super Bowls, or are they close friends?
Oh, they're not close friends. They don't get together socially very often. Troy for a number of years, applied pressure to Jerry to put Jimmie Johsnson in the Ring of Honor, especially after he was in the Hall of Fame. He felt like his whole generation of players didn't belong in the Ring of Honor any more than Jimmy did, and that it was incomplete without Jimmy being included. And so ultimately, not long ago, they prevailed and they got Jimmy in the Ring of Honor, just last year actually. But no, I don't think they have a very close relationship. I mean, I think there were times when earlier in his career where Troy would have considered, leaving broadcasting to become the general manager of the Cowboys, or if he was going to have true autonomy and real control over personnel. But I don't think that ever came close to happening because Jerry and Stephen were, often offended by some of the things that Troy did share publicly in terms of his opinion of their job performance. But that just wasn't a concern for Troy. Like, he wanted to be honest about all that. But I think that could have happened at a time, and I think that would have been hugely beneficial to the Cowboys. But it never will happen now that we're past that point. And but what I mentioned about Troy feeling like he had half a career and the other half was wasted while Jerry was trying to prove himself as a general manager. I think Jerry has as much acknowledged that this week when he talked about, hey, I didn't get my biggest regret in all my time as general manager is I never got a team around Tony Romo that was good enough to get to a Super Bowl. And yeah, I'm kind of in the process of repeating that right now with Dak Prescott. I mean, they've had these 2 straight decades of high-level quarterback performance, and yet they've not even managed to get to a championship game. Now, part of that is on the quarterbacks in the postseason. Their play, hasn't been great for the most part. I mean, they're 4-9 combined for a reason, Tony and Dak. But they also haven't had great teams. I don't know that they ever went on the field, in those games where their season ended, with the possible exception of the debacle against the Packers, where they were clearly, demonstratively the better team based on how they had played that year. But they were never better than the 49ers, teams that they lost to. So, I think that criticism persists, and maybe Jerry's recognizing that there's some validity to it because of what's happened in the Romo era and how similarly it looks to what's going on right now with the Dak Prescott era.
Ed Werder on the Out of Bounds show. Yeah, as much as, and you know this, as much as I'm a big fan of Dak Prescott, and I understand how he lifted up Mississippi State, and he's played really well for Dallas, and I think it's a disaster all around him. The one, I wish Dak was put a little bit more pressure on Jerry.
Yeah.
He's 32 now. He's made several $100 million. He'll have a great life either way. But I wish, because I didn't realize until I watched the documentary with you and Jerry and everybody in it, how vocal Aikman was and how, ticked off and so on, and some of the things that he would say. I wish Dak would put a little more pressure on Jerry and Steven in the press, but I don't know if he's going to do that. How do you see it, Ed?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I kind of hinted at that with Dak a week or two ago when we had access to him. He speaks every Thursday, and he will today to the media. And one of the things I asked him, given the disparity between how he's performing and what the offense is doing, leading the league, and then having the worst defense in the league, like, what are the limits of your leadership as far as, do you feel confident and that it's your responsibility to be engaging with the entire team? Like, could you go into a meeting room and call out the defense, which is what I think he ought to do right now if he hasn't done it. And if he ever did something like that, we probably wouldn't know. He would do it in a very subtle way. But yeah, I definitely think that, Troy made his position when he was the quarterback of this franchise. He made his position well known, both publicly and privately, to Jerry. And I'm not sure that happens with Dak. Maybe it does, but I don't know. In the 10 years he's been here, I don't have an example that I know that happened. And I do have examples knowing that happened with Troy. And maybe it's, some people would say, well, it's because he hasn't ever won anything like Aikman did. He won Super Bowls. You have, that collateral. Or maybe it's not consistent with his personality, but he says he holds his offensive teammates and others accountable. So why would you not hold Jerry accountable unless you feel like, well, he made you the richest player in the history of football, begrudgingly. You had to fight him for it.
Right.
But you still have that designation all this time later, a year and a half later. You're still the highest paid player in all of football, in the history of the entire sport. And so maybe that makes it difficult for him to criticize Jerry publicly as well.
Okay. Ed Werder, recognized by the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He joins us on the Out of Bounds show and the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. All right, we got a few minutes here, Ed. That was great, by the way. We'll go Commanders and Cowboys. Washington, 1.5 favorite, games in Dallas. Washington's not what they were last year, but still a dangerous team. This is another divisional. Last week, good Lord, Rico Dowdle, I feel like he went for 600 yards. I text you. I was just upset. And I need to not be, but I was.
Well, you took it personally. Unfortunately, they didn't.
Yeah. So Dan Quinn is coming back. He has done a damn good job for the Commanders, as you know. He did a good job with the Cowboys. Handicap this one for me, Ed.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about Dan Quinn is, if you look at the last 6 years in Dallas, from the time Mike McCarthy became the head coach in 2020, they're on their fourth different defensive coordinator. And the only exception from what we're experiencing right now, where the Cowboys are one of the worst defenses in football and being scored at on a historic level, were the 3 years that they had with Dan Quinn. He created a defensive identity for the Cowboys that was based in quarterback pressures, takeaways, defensive touchdowns. I mean, two of their corners who now haven't touched a football, literally they don't have an interception or a pass defense, Deron Bland and Trayvon Diggs, both led the NFL in interceptions in two different seasons under Dan Quinn. And now he comes in and he's, facing the hottest quarterback in football. it comes at a time when everybody's scrutinizing the poor performance of the defensive side of the ball and what possible solutions there can be. And the other interesting part of the Dan Quinn return is when Brian Schottenheimer came into the Cowboys organization, despite his vast background and really because of it, he was actually paired with Dan Quinn. He was an analyst, but he was helping Quinn. He was in the defensive meeting rooms offering an offensive perspective to Dan Quinn on, well, if I was drawing the game plan up against, you this week, here's what I would attack in your scheme. Here's the players in this matchup I would, try to isolate and take advantage of. So it's interesting from all those points of view, but this is a rivalry that Dak has, really owned. He's 6-0 with 17 touchdown passes and no interceptions in his career at home against the Commanders. And the Cowboys averaged 41.3 points per game in those games. That's the most points per game by any team at home versus another team since 1950.
Damn. Okay. I still don't feel good about it. So
how about this? Dak's 20-2 at home against divisional opponents, and that's the best record by any quarterback with at least 15 home divisional starts since the merger in 1970. He's won 17 straight home games against the NFC East. Only Tom Brady and Brett Favre have longer home divisional winning streaks since the 1970 merger than Dak has against Washington.
And Jerry and Stephen Jones have wasted it. Unbelievable. All right. Ed Werder on the Out of Bounds show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Ed, that was fantastic. Have a great weekend. We'll talk next week, my man.
Always great to talk to you, and text me anytime on Sunday when you're upset.
Ed Werder joining us on the Out of Bounds show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone, brought to you by Pearl River Resort and the Golden Moon Casino Vegas-style sportsbook. Bet $50 there. Play award-winning Dancing Rabbit Golf Club for $40. Bet 50, play 40 on the property of Pearl River Resort. Show is also brought to you by our friends at Juniker Jewelry Store. If you are in the market for an engagement ring and you want to be a 5-star player, Juniker Jewelry Store. If you're looking for a bracelet, earrings, a beautiful necklace, you want to go local, you want to go with the team at Juniker. Juniker Jewelry Store. John and Corey and the team do an amazing job. They're a mile down the road from where we are right here on Highland Colony in Madison. And they do it right. Super high-quality work and unbelievable reputation. Juniker Jewelry Store. Highland Colony in Madison. Engagement rings, bracelets, necklaces, and earrings. All powered by Juniker Jewelry Store on Highland Colony in Madison. We're live in the Bank Plus studio. Out of Bounds, 105.9 The Zone. ESPN Lunch today brought to you by Martin's in Livingston. Let's go a cup of gumbo and the wings.